hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 121 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on this Sunday, late afternoon into early evening in New York. If you're catching this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and also, if you could, share the page with others who you think might also enjoy. If you're catching this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, are enjoying the content, same general rule applies. Please click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. So today will be the 8th entry into our continuing series of The Best Movie You've Never Seen. And it's another film that probably less seen than many of the first 7, but a movie that cineasts will no doubt be familiar with. It's still a little bit obscure, even though it was added to the National Film Registry, I want to say 10 years ago, somewhere in that ballpark. But the average film fan, especially if we're talking even young Gen Xers, elder millennials, it's not likely that they've come across this movie. Another sort of classic, under the radar, despite a big cast, big director, but I've never heard of it being free on one of the major platforms. I don't recall it ever being on Netflix, which for many years was the primary driver of, let's say younger people discovering movies that maybe they had only heard about, and however you want to slice it in that regard. The movie is John Frankenheimer's 1966 bizarre science fiction postmodern meditation on I don't even know what exactly. It's about a lot of different things at once. Science fiction is the clearest genre, but as far as how else would you describe it, there are moments where it feels like documentary, cinema verite type shit, and other times where it is very highly polished and very cinematic and very artificial. Seconds is a movie that developed a cult following sometime in the late 60s, early 70s. And part of the reason, it's not really a good reason, is that the star, Rock Hudson, who, as many of you know, he worked in Hollywood. He was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood for many years. He wasn't allowed to live the way that he wanted to live. Rock Hudson I don't believe he was even bisexual. He was gay, and had to put forth appearances of heterosexuality. In his professional life, many movies, All That Heaven Allows, the films that he did with Doris Day, they were presenting him in a certain particular way to appeal to a certain particular demographic. Like all of the stuff we talk about now, Rock Hudson went through it and lived it. I can't imagine how difficult it was for the people who were closest to him in every possible way. The movie Seconds, whether intentionally or not, and I feel like this was part of why Rock Hudson wanted to do this, because this was a guy who had made a lot of Westerns, he made the kind of goofy comedies with Doris, but he was always interested in stretching and trying different things as an actor. He was still a very young man in the mid-1960s. So this movie, which as I say, is very difficult to classify other than the very general postmodern science fiction. And when I say postmodern, I'm being literal. I don't want to get into a discussion. I remember in film school, we always talked about postmodernism and modernity. And I always wanted to hide under the desk because they were the most boring lectures I ever had to absorb. I could still hear postmodernism, modernity. Come on, leave me alone. But in the world of the movie Seconds, set in, at the time, the present, would have been 1965, film come out in 66. There is science in this movie that not only didn't exist in 1965, 66, it still doesn't exist, and it ain't ever going to exist. That's what I mean by postmodern sci-fi. It is events and elements that cannot happen in a naturally occurring real world. So here you have this movie which has these moments of cinema verite, this almost horrifying realism, of the protagonist, main character, and then this artificially constructed scenario where you say, holy shit, imagine if this were possible. So a personal story about this film, other than the fact that, as I say, I discovered it. I read a book on cult movies when I was 15. Fantastic book. One of the movies in this office was in that book. Blue Velvet was in the same book. It was actually Cult Movies 3 by Danny Perry. Highly recommended. There were movies like, Rocky Horror Picture Show, even Blade Runner, which had famously bombed at the box office and then developed a cult following later on when it hit, home video and Betamax and Laserdisc and all of that. The movie Seconds is a film that my father saw. It is the first film he saw when he got out of the Army in 1966. My dear old dad, he was 23 when he got out of the Army in 1966. Different times, of course, different reality, as this movie pitches different realities at you. A little bit of a spoiler alert. But here's what my father said, and this is something that goes beyond movies. This is something that we, as we age, experience sometimes in real time. So my father watched the movie and he liked it. Most of the people that he saw it with some friends, they didn't get it. They didn't understand, but my dad did get it. Because from a broad perspective, the movie is about wanting to start fresh when you're not necessarily doing that poorly in life. But you're also miserable, if you're being completely honest. And great old actor named John Randolph, who later starred in a big TV series, I think it was on ABC, called Wings, with Steven Weber, among many others. John Randolph was a fantastic character actor. And in the movie Seconds, he seems to be the main, he is the main character, but he seems to be the central actor who we're going to focus on throughout the story. And unfortunately, this movie, there's no way that you can go in cold with zero spoilers, because I've already mentioned that Rock Hudson is the star. So now I'm telling you of some other actor who is the star. So I apologize. But the great actor John Randolph, who was probably in his 50s, he plays a wealthy banker. We meet this man, a wealthy banker, at the beginning of the film in Grand Central Station, ground level, setting us right into the reality, the sort of diegetic reality of New York City at the time. Doesn't look that much different in a closed-in kind of fisheye shot. James Wong Howe, top 10 all-time cinematographers. Some people would put him in the top 5. His work in this film is as good as anything you will ever see. You could just watch the movie for the camera angles and say, well, how the fuck did he pull that off? How did he pull that off? How did he pull this off? What the fuck lens is this? Mind-blowing stuff. Next level shit for a movie that's almost 60 years old. James Wong Howe, another one for you to Google. So we meet this guy named Arthur Hamilton, played by, as I say, John Randolph. And my father mentioned how much he enjoyed the movie, that there were things he didn't see coming, and there was a lot of stuff that was holy shit, like mind-blowing, and then there was stuff that just felt real. So what my dad said is when he saw the movie at age 23, he was struck by how old the main character of Arthur Hamilton, as played by John Randolph, wow, this guy is really old. Sometime in the mid-1990s. Dad called me. He was, living in Woodbury. I was already, we were in Huntington. I'm sorry. This was probably around the time I was in college. And he had heard me talk the movie up, and he hadn't seen it now in like 30 years. And I just know that I wasn't home. But he called. I was probably visiting my mom in Massapequa. And he called to say, movie Seconds. I just checked the listings. I'm going to watch it. I haven't seen it. I barely remember it. I just remember how the actor at the beginning seemed really old. So I got home 3 hours later, and Dad was a little bit upset. What happened? You didn't like the movie? He says, no. It's even better than I remember. Really, really good. So what's the problem? Gets a little smile. Dad was famous for this little, almost Cheshire cat grin that he would get, a little mischievous. He says, Geer, that old guy at the beginning of the movie doesn't seem so old to me anymore. And I started laughing. Meantime, I'm in my early 20s, but I knew what he meant. Because 23-year-old Alan Philip Cohen, may you rest in eternal cinematic heaven, Dad, the biggest movie fan I knew, John Randolph would have seemed ancient to a 23-year-old in 1966. He was at least a decade younger than my dad was when Dad watched this movie, give or take, maybe 5 years, 10 years. The point is, the guy now looked like a contemporary. He didn't look like some decrepit old man. Time changes perspective. We meet this guy, Arthur Hamilton, right at the beginning in a very tense, intense scene with an unbelievable title sequence by Saul Bass, one of Alfred Hitchcock's favorite and greatest collaborators, the best title assembler in the history of cinema. I doubt anybody's going to take issue with that bold statement, because I don't even think it is a bold statement. The title sequence by Saul Bass in the movie Seconds is up there with Catch Me If You Can, Charade, North by Northwest, also done by Saul Bass. If you don't think title sequences are important, well, we have a disagreement on that. I think they're very important, especially when they're done as well as they are in the movie Seconds. And another name that I have mentioned repeatedly, and I'm going to keep mentioning because of just how fucking badass and boss level this guy was as a composer, Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry Goldsmith's score for Seconds is unlike any other film score that I can think of. I can't describe it, but if you hear it, you will say, holy shit. Much as some of the camera work in this movie, you will say, holy shit. So Arthur Hamilton he lives in Scarsdale. He's a banker. He's well off. He has a wife, and he has a daughter who is married, lives out of state. I think she lives in Colorado. He gets a phone call from his friend Charlie, who has been dead for 6 years, 7 years. Now, that can't be right, but his friend says, I'm actually more alive than I ever were when you knew me, or some bullshit like that. Did you see that guy and the scene in Grand Central Station after the title card and this incredible title sequence, some random guy jumps Arthur Hamilton and gives him an address. So his dead friend, I'm not joking, his dead friend calls him and says, you got to go to that address. And we don't know that he's going to go to the address. But then there is a scene of such incredible cinema verite level realism in a movie that is about to take a crazy turn into science fiction. But there is a really unbelievable sequence where Arthur Hamilton comes home and we see that he and his wife care for one another. There is love, but there's nothing left between them anymore. They may as well be random strangers sharing the same space. There's nothing there. And there's a moment in the movie that you rarely see in cinema. You might see some version of it now, maybe in an independent film, more like. But it was something that really had not been done up to that point. We're talking about the era in which married couples who had 15 kids slept in separate beds. In the immortal words of Biff from Back to the Future, hello, McFly, anyone home? Arthur Hamilton and his wife start to engage in, I guess we would call it foreplay, with the end result being actual sex. And they simply stop. They stop. There's no passion. There's no verve. There's no esprit de corps. There's no desire. There's nothing in this terrible scene. Is why he decides to go to the address of whatever it is. We don't know what the fuck it is. Maybe it's a job offer. But the fact that his dead friend called him, I'm not dead. What do you mean you're not dead? Went to your funeral, a-hole? He doesn't say that. So Arthur Hamilton, the following day, goes to this building. It's a regular office building. But he gets up to a certain floor and realizes that he can't actually go back down from this floor. Is it a secret floor? Are we in Being John Malkovich weirdo territory where you have a floor between floors but only certain people can access? Or Harry Potter, where only certain non-muggles can see, well, no, there's actually another platform over here or secret compartment in a station. We don't know. And that's why this is so absurdly effective, because it's not making sense. There are syntax errors all over this movie in the first third. So he goes to this place and he meets a character played by another great old actor, Will Geer. Geer, name for you to Google. Will Geer. Will Geer plays the head of this kind of, I guess they're a company, and they specialize in radical, reconstructive, fully bodied plastic surgery. And it's so comprehensive that they're even going to, not only are they going to change what you look like, you're going to seem 20 years younger. They're going to do things with the tensile ligaments in your hands so your signature is different. They're going to do some fuckery with your vocal cords. You're going to sound different. You will emerge from this surgery as a different person with your memories. We're going to have to change your name though. Why? Well, we're going to need to produce a body. What do you mean produce a body? You are going to die. Arthur Hamilton will die and be reborn as, well, we haven't figured out the name yet, but somebody else, and he'll have a new life and a new name. Well, what about my wife? Oh, no. And your daughter. That's fine. They're going to be okay. You have a really nice insurance policy, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson! Okay, so he's not so sure he's going to do it. And in another unbelievable scene where we're like, what the fuck are we looking at? He is drugged and seems to take part in the sexual assault of a woman who works for the company. Now, he doesn't actually assault anybody. He is zonked out of his mind. But they manipulate him using camera angles. It's like movie within a movie kind of shit. They're doing special effects within the movie to show him this film of him apparently assaulting this girl, which he didn't do. She was an actress, and they fucked around with camera angles to make it seem as if he did something that he didn't do. So he's like, what the fuck? It's like, well, you don't really have much of a choice now. We know you didn't do anything wrong, but if we put this tape out there, your life and career is over. They don't even have to say that. He knows he's fucked. So he agrees. And it's a great line of dialogue, which is very applicable to everyone's life. And it's a kind of thing that we always ponder, even if we don't express it this way. And Will Geer says, isn't it easier to go forward when you know you can't go back? That's really, really good advice in general. But especially if a door behind you has been slammed on you, don't try to jimmy the lock. Keep moving forward. Don't turn around. Go forward. You know, as Satchel Paige, the late great baseball player, said, don't look back. Something might be gaining on you. Leave the past behind. Now, this isn't really what he wanted to do, but you could argue the fact that he even was taking phone calls from a dead person. Obviously, that can't be right. Taking phone calls from a dead person and going to this look at, he was going to do it. He was always going to do it. But they kind of sweeten the pot in a negative way, so to speak. And I should also point out one of the other actors in this sequence, a terrific character actor named Jeff Corey, C-O-R-E-Y, another one for you to Google. And I only mention this because his character is actually almost like a comic relief, where he's obsessed with the food at this company. And John Randolph, as at the time Arthur Hamilton, is looking at him like he's a fucking idiot because he's going into such detail about the way they cook the chicken. It's like fucking hilarious. But I mentioned Jeff Corey because he was an actor who got fucked by the system during the McCarthy hearings. He got screwed. And the fact that he was able to have his career resurrected to do great work as he does in this movie, take a bow. In memoriam, Jeff Corey, for making a comeback when you were pretty much left for dead by Joe McCarthy's machine. So, Arthur Hamilton undergoes what we see are pretty crazy surgical procedures. Obviously, they're not showing, but there is some footage of real surgeries. We just don't know exactly what they're doing. And the chief surgeon, an actor, a terrific old actor named Richard Anderson, who some of you might know, especially if you're Gen X or boomers, even older. He played Lee Major's point man in the TV show The $6 Million Man. Steve Austin, astronaut, whole thing. Richard Anderson was like a CIA operative. They called it OSI, but it may as well have been CIA. But he was like way, way up the food chain. He's great in that show, and he's very solid in this movie, Seconds. So all of this crazy surgery and intensive physical rehabilitation of every possible kind. And when the bandages come off, we're looking at Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson, now he's got a new name, Tony Wilson, and he did something with his hands. Now he's a painter. I don't have any idea how that would be possible. Again, postmodernism. This is not reality. We're in an altered scenario here in every sense of that phrase. We see newspaper headlines, noted banker Arthur Hamilton dead in fire. So we start thinking, okay, that's great. Whose body did they find and match to the dental records of Arthur Hamilton? How did they do that exactly? Whose body is it? We don't know. It's not something we normally would think about. Oh yes, he's found dead. Yeah, he's found dead. No, he's not. He's here. He looks like Rock Hudson now. Whose body was that? I don't know. Kind of thing, well, let's not worry about that. Hopefully that doesn't come into play later on, right? So he meets, briefly, his dead friend. The dead friend explains to him what's up. And yeah, the dead friend doesn't look like he did. Much as Rock Hudson looks nothing like John Randolph. Now, the reason why they cast John Randolph is if you go by facial structure, the facial structure is not that different. But they did a really good job. And interestingly enough, the actor who plays his friend Charlie in the movie is the same actor who plays the mayor in Jaws. And it's embarrassing that I can't remember his name because he was another really great character actor. Mayor Vaughn was the name of the character, and he is played by, oh God, so bad, Murray Hamilton. Murray Hamilton was also in The Hustler with Paul Newman. He's one of those guys. It's like this movie had so many of those actors, these great character actors, who were probably just happy to get the work, but that they didn't just show up in this one movie and wow, they were really great. You point to other great films. And Murray Hamilton in Jaws is amazing. And you could say his character is over the top and cartoony, but he's never less than believable that this is how this guy would behave. He'd behave like a little sniveling weasel, worrying only about tourist money when people are getting fucking eaten up by sharks. It's a much smaller, quieter role in Seconds, but he makes every minute count. So now Rock Hudson, almost like witness protection program, he can't really go back and contact his widow. What would the word even be? Contact the woman that he was married to 3 days or the 2 weeks earlier, whatever the timeline is. He can't communicate with his daughter. He's got to just start fresh completely and act like all of the memories that he has don't really matter anymore. So, without going into spoiler territory, it wouldn't really be a movie if Rock Hudson's new life as Tony Wilson, this kind of hot young painter living out in California, if everything went according to Hoyle and he experienced, kind of endless happiness. The movie shows what seems pretty obvious to someone like me now, but maybe as a much younger person, I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it this way. Whether you are happy, whether you are content, is not really about where you are, who you're with, or the trappings of fame and money. It's a lot deeper than that. And some people are clinically depressed, where it's their their own biochemistry that is not allowing them to feel we would call a normal gamut of emotions. Happy, sad, as opposed to just being miserable all the time. Now, we are not led to believe in the movie that there's anything physiologically wrong with either Arthur Hamilton or Tony Wilson. We saw Arthur Hamilton trying to reconnect and rekindle with his wife and kind of failing miserably. And the pain of that scene resonates. It resonates for a lot of people, and it doesn't even have to be for that particular reason. But sometimes, hell, Gordon Lightfoot's famous song, If You Could Read My Mind, it's that scene. Basically, that scene. He has the right emotion, and he still has love, but the feeling's gone and I just can't get it back. I don't know where we went wrong. The feeling's gone. I just can't get it back. And the story essentially is about not just recapturing youth or getting a second chance. The title is not really an accident that it's called Seconds, but it's about grasping at straws, basically, because even with perfect body, perfect hair, you look like Rock Hudson, you have money, you have attractive women throwing themselves at you, which, again, you want to do the Rock Hudson psychoanalysis, that's a whole other thing, but we're just going by the world of the movie at this point. It doesn't mean you're going to be anything less than miserable. And so Rock, who does some of his very best film acting in this movie, by the way, he was really, really good. It's not a movie star performance. And I appreciate it just as a fan in general. And we talked about in other episodes when even people like Mel Gibson tried something different, where Mel in The Singing Detective, you didn't even recognize him. And what he did in the movie Signs, where he de-emphasized, didn't go back to any of his usual movie star quirks, the facial expressions that he was famous for. He tried desperately to not fall into the kinds of, not that there's anything wrong with it, but if you're not trying to play movie star role like a movie star, is what I mean. Rock in this movie is giving a performance out of an independent film, even though the filmmaker who I've talked about, John Frankenheimer, is a big player in Hollywood. I mean, he had made Manchurian Candidate. He had done 7 Days in May. But this film has stretches where it feels like an independent film, where the use of, it feels like a handheld camera. Again, James Wong Howe making different choices. Normally, a director would check him back, as I talked about Stanley Kubrick basically threatening to kneecap the guy that was fucking with him on The Killing in 1956. But Frankenheimer and James Wong Howe had issues apparently during the making of this movie, but to Frankenheimer's credit, and he was old school, he didn't like being told what to do. 30 years later, Val Kilmer and him almost had a celebrity death match in the jungle while shooting Island of Dr. Moreau. Boy, that would have been something, because Frankenheimer was a fucking tough son of a gun. Got to go with Val, though. He was so young. But Frankenheimer and James Wong Howe apparently quarreled over how to shoot various scenes. And Frankenheimer let Howe do his thing. That is how esteemed James Wong Howe was within the industry. And even if Frankenheimer, I don't know about this fisheye lens there, James. And again, we're not talking fight. We're just saying, for real, creative differences, normal creative differences that happen in the making of any movie. There are some directors who are so set on one way, they're not going to hear of anything else. Frankenheimer gave his cinematographer, who obviously he greatly respected, he gave him more room to just do a lot of shit that wasn't really done at the time. So you have these moments, these kinds of what I call, in the second half, after Rock takes over, these sort of cinema verite moments. And there's an incredible scene of making wine. And I've never seen that done, but in the world of the movie, it's so real. It feels like we're watching, please forgive me for saying this, we're watching 50 naked people squash grapes to eventually have them refined and processed and turn it into bottled wine. The scene is so weird and bizarre and something you've never seen before, and you just, throughout this movie, even if the story isn't that exciting, first third is fucking crazy. I would say that right up until the moment that the surgery is complete, the movie is as gripping and riveting as, I mean, it's up there with the opening segment, the boot camp sequence of Full Metal Jacket for me. Those are two of my absolute favorite huge chunks of movie, long first act or however you want to describe it. But many of the scenes with Rock have that same gut punch feel of cinema verite. And we're watching this man, it doesn't matter that it looks like Rock Hudson, we're watching this man try to connect with others. And it's easier said than done, because despite the trappings of fame and looking a certain way, and maybe even experiencing some physical pleasures that he wouldn't have as, the Arthur Hamilton, he's still not feeling right. He's not feeling well, and he's questioning all of his choices. And I'm not going to go any further as far as spoilers, but I will say what I teased as far as the Rock Hudson personal perspective of the movie Seconds. Now, I don't know if he spoke of this in detail before he passed. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS. He was one of the first, if not the first, major figures to get very sick and die. He wasn't that old. So heartbreaking. Rock maybe he was 60, and he had recently been on a soap opera. I don't know if it was Dynasty or Dallas or Falcon Crest, but he was still healthy. Fucking guy looked dynamite in his mid-50s. He looked fantastic. He had let his hair go gray. He looked amazing. And then he got very sick and he died. So there might be some interviews where he talks about the parallels of the movie Seconds and his real life, that you could say that the character of Arthur Hamilton is how society wanted him to be. And the rebirth is how Rock Hudson would have wanted to live his life out loud as himself, not having to hide anything. And Seconds came out and it didn't do well at the box office. And many critics loved it. This is not a film, again, this is more of a critics movie, but there were critics that thought it was terrible. But there were enough who said, you must seek this movie out. This is a treasure. We've never seen anything like it. And that's how it starts a movie in general will start to build a cult following. You sometimes have this incredible polarization as far as the critical response. As with Blue Velvet, which you had people saying it's the best movie in decades. Gene Siskel famously with Roger Ebert saying it's the best movie of its kind since Psycho, which was 25 years earlier, reminded me of that. It moved me like that. And then you had his old buddy, his frenemy, Roger Ebert saying, it was a fucking catastrophe, Gene. It's horrendous. What movie did you want? And the argument ensues. But cult movies often hit some people and miss others. And fortunately, history found John Frankenheimer's Seconds, a science fiction film with cinema verite, pseudo-documentary, with a kind of cinema verite, pseudo-documentary ethos in many spots, with stunning camera work. The whole movie, you can't believe what they're doing with the camera. You've definitely never seen anything like it. The cutting is so precise also. The rhythm of the editing is on point. The performances all feel real. John Randolph was a talented actor, but he feels like this guy, Arthur Hamilton. And Rock Hudson, big movie star, comes across like Tony Wilson. You can feel the weight of his former life and the memories throughout. And backing it up, the extraordinary musical score from the late, great Jerry Goldsmith, who I don't know exactly how many credits he had, but of the major composers, including John Williams, I think Jerry Goldsmith did the most film scores from, going back to the 60s all the way till not long before he passed. He passed in 2000, where he wasn't that old. He was in his mid-70s. You look at John Williams, God bless him, is 93 and still doing great work. He did the whole soundtrack for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And he keeps talking about retiring, but they're doing a documentary on him that Spielberg is apparently part of. I don't think he's retiring. But the idea is Goldsmith was still turning out really good work in his later years. As I said, his score for Matinee, his score for First Night in the mid-90s, vastly underrated. It's a phenomenal score. That guy was money. But I would say that the main theme for Seconds, creepy as fuck and just fantastic. I apologize for going on long, but this is one of a long list of movies I'm very passionate about. And I was and have been grateful and heartened to see more people becoming aware of Seconds. And there was going to be a remake in the late 90s. It didn't work out. David Twohy, I think, he did the movie The Trigger Effect. The movie Selfless with Ryan Reynolds and Ben Kingsley has a lot of similar elements. It's not really a remake, but it's about 30 to 40% the same movie. I'll leave it at that. But with that, we've reached the end of episode 121 and the 8th entry into our continuing series, The Best Movie You've Never Seen. In this instance, the John Frankenheimer 1966 postmodern sci-fi classic Seconds, starring Rock Hudson, John Randolph, Salome Jens, that's the name of the actress that's in there with Rock in the second half, Will Geer, and Jeff Corey. The 8th entry in our continuing series of The Best Movie You've Never Seen. And it's available as of right now on the Canopy app. That's that kind of strange free movie app where all you need is a library card, as absurd as that seems. But if you have a library card or know somebody who has a library card, you have unlimited access to their library of movies. And Seconds is uncut and streaming on that app right now. Again, you can get it on Prime, but if you don't want to pay, that's how you do it. If you don't want to plunk down to $3, don't want to spend anybody's money. But if you checked out this long episode on the YouTube channel and enjoyed it, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you've caught up with this episode on the audio platforms like iTunes, Spotify, same rule applies. Click like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 122 real soon. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.